With a focus on delivering on campaign promises and navigating a complex political landscape, President Trump's first 100 days are set to be a whirlwind of activity. And here to discuss is Patrick Schoettmer, an associate professor of political science at the Seattle University. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, of course.
Yes, so we wanted to get right to it. President Trump has already started issuing executive orders. What types of issues are we seeing the president move quickly on?
So I would say we could put his early actions into four broad baskets. The first area is probably focusing on the government itself, essentially trying to seize more control over what the government does itself, because he's concerned that people will try to slow walk policies they're opposed to. Second big area would be along the border, where we see militarization of the border being an important thing he wants to do, and expanding the scope of military conflict, as well as threatening cities who might oppose some of his moves. We see the third big area where he's making some move on in being trade, and particularly moving towards imposing tariffs on countries he sees as either exploiting the U.S. or as being potential geopolitical rivals. And then we see a basket of other issues that are addressing things like race and gender equality, and things where he feels policy has shifted too far to the left.
Yeah, and for someone that doesn't even know what an executive order is, can you explain that as well?
Well, in one sense, you could say an executive order is just sort of like a press release with nicer stationery. But it's basically a description of official government policy. In theory, the executive order has to be rooted in authority that's either expressly given to him by the Constitution or granted to him by Congress. But what we see Trump doing is actually trying to expand what executive orders should be able to do. And so I think that's where we're going to see a lot of the conflict.
Yeah, and cabinet confirmation hearings are also underway. How long does this process usually take?
It depends on how controversial the candidate is. We saw Marco Rubio move through pretty quickly, but he was also a member of the Senate, somebody everyone knew. Pete Hegseth has taken several weeks already. So when they're more controversial, it takes more time. And because each committee only has capacity to look at a certain number of people, you usually move on the higher profile people first, and the people further down the food chain could take months even to get into position.
And you touched on this a little bit. How has that fight been at this point there?
Well, we see Trump making his initial moves right now, and we're just now beginning to see the reaction. For example, the move to try to unilaterally redefine what the 14th Amendment means as far as birthright citizenship was one of his first moves. And we've already seen attorneys general from around the country sue him to try to block that implementation. So we're just now beginning to see the outlines of what the legal battles will look like.
Definitely. And the president comes into this administration, obviously, with a lot more knowledge on how the government works, having been in this position before. So do you think that's going to make him more effective?
I think the main way it's going to make him effective is that it allows him to bring in people who are already aligned to him. When he came in 2017, he was actually looking to see which of the Obama people he could keep. He wasn't aware that usually the whole administration left with the previous president and you had to restaff it with your new president. He understands far better how the system works, so he's able to put people in place that more strongly support his agenda and will move more quickly and more aggressively to try to implement it.
Definitely. And are there other differences, too, that you want to mention that you think he faces from his first term in office to now?
Well, there are a couple big differences, but the biggest one is that this is his second term, and he's running against a ticking clock. He's got probably about 18 months to 2 years before he'll become what we call a lame duck, where he's in office, but everyone starts ignoring him because they're already focusing in on the next presidential election. And early results suggest, and the way history usually plays, tells us that he'll probably lose control of at least one of the two houses of Congress in 2026. And because of that, there's only a short period of time for him to actually try to get stuff done. He probably knows this, which is why we see so many aggressive moves right now.
Yeah, it does seem like there's a lot going on. And what must the president's opposition do to prevent him from putting any of these policies into effect?
Well, there's a couple different things they have to do. The president is trying to make aggressive use of executive orders, but in the federal government, power still lies in Congress. So he has to move big changes through the House and the Senate. And in the House, they have a very narrow lead, the Republican Party does. And so Democrats need to work with Republicans to try to stop what they see some of the worst excesses. In the Senate, they have the tradition of supermajorities to pass legislation, which means Democrats can use a procedure called the filibuster to slow stuff down happening there. So what that would require is Democrats getting on the same page, figuring out their strategy, and most importantly, developing a communication strategy that clearly expresses to the American people what they're opposed to and what they're fighting for.
Is there anything else so far that the president's done that you think should be on our radar that we should be watching out for?
To me, the most attention-grabbing, perhaps one might even say the most alarming thing, actually came in his inaugural speech when he announced that the U.S. was committing itself to territorial expansion. We saw him again this morning, once again referring to the possibility of Canada joining the U.S. And this, combined with what we see around the world, like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Chinese threats against Taiwan, suggests that we might be moving away from this 80-year period of relative peace we've seen in the international system and back towards a more violent global political system.
Wow. Thank you so much for being here and sharing all this information with us. We really appreciate it.